What if things go really poorly? I don't think they will. But if things go really poorly and let's say midway through the season, Ollie's gone in this hypothetical. I mean, Yadier Molina, you got Daniel Descalzo. Yachty is so beloved. You know, when you hire a Yachty to be a manager, you're going to have to fire him down the road. Everybody gets fired. I just think, look, I root for the Cardinals to do well, but I also root for chaos and for storylines. And if Yachty were to be the manager, oh my God, like on a daily basis, it would be just so freaking interesting.
It would be chaos. And if things go wrong in 2024, it almost definitely happens. If you ask my opinion, the role is almost perfect too that Yachty's in right now. Like we all know, we all could sense the way it drug out of like we know he's coming to the Cardinals again. What's the role going to be? The way that it ends up is like man, an advisor, and he can be here when he wants to be here. Like that's a perfect Yachty role, and that's the role that I would expect a player of his stature, a guy who's going to be in the Hall of Fame, in my opinion, should be in the Hall of Fame. Like it's similar to the Holiday thing where Holiday was a star. If you want to get back into baseball, wouldn't you just want to be the guy? Otherwise, like, meh, I'll wait until somebody's ready to make me the guy. I don't want to be the bench coach for a year. Like, I don't want to be the grunt man for a year. Now, if you're a Daniel Descalso, no disrespect to his career, but he wasn't a superstar. He wasn't that kind of name. If you're a John Jay working your way up, like you know that that's the path if you want to continue to advance. Whereas a Yachty can go, I'll wait over here as an advisor. I'll come to spring training. I'll see my buddies. I'll help. Like there will be value that Yachty brings to the table. But the freedom of schedule that he's going to have is perfect because he's already going to be domineering, kind of lording over Ollie Marmol this year, regardless. He doesn't need to physically be there every day to do that. But like if you're Ollie, he he knows what the stakes are. He knows the Cardinals need to win this year. Mo knows that. Like everybody knows, even if we really don't believe that Mo could get relieved of his duties by Bill DeWitt, like there should be that pressure internally for everybody to say, hey, this has to be a year where it's different. But if you're Yachty, man, he's in the perfect role to, if things don't go well, it wasn't Yachty's fault. He wasn't really here the whole time. And yeah, he would be a great managerial candidate and he wants to be one. So he slides right in. Like I'm not predicting that happens, but what's interesting is not if they lose 90 games. Then it happens, in my opinion. What's interesting is if they win 83 games and don't make the playoffs, then what happens? Right? Because last year it was the roster to me. It was the way the team was built. It didn't make enough sense to get them there. The manager wasn't the guy that you can pin that on. But this year, if they're like, hey, we did the things that we meant to do, who do you blame at that point for an 83 win season? That's where it could get uncomfortable.
That's a great point. I hadn't thought of that. So let's say that happens. So if they end up at 83, that means they're going to be in the playoff hunt for really the whole season
Till
down
late
to the
September.
last
Yeah.
week or two, which means Ollie doesn't get fired during the season. But at that point, 83 wins, no playoffs. I think you have to fire Ollie. The
Or
Cardinals
just
might be the
you don't
only.
renew him, right? Well,
Well,
his
okay.
contract's up. You just
I'm
say,
sorry. Yes.
yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Potato, potato. You're
That
going to
matters though
relieve
to the
him.
Cardinals, right? Because it's an optics thing of, well, they don't do rash things. They don't fire guys, but to build a wit that matters is kind of my thought process.
Okay. I think this is a great point, which I hadn't thought of. Because if you win 83, though, okay, to keep him, you'd have to give him a 2-year extension, which doesn't really matter because you could fire him halfway through next season anyway. But that's really interesting. If the Cardinals win 83 games and Ollie's here, he doesn't get fired during the season. But then, yeah, you probably have to not renew him, and then you move on. And then is it Yachty or Descalzo or whoever? That's super interesting to me. I hadn't thought about that.
I think that's where you could land. Like if we're projecting mid 80s, wouldn't be crazy to think they fall a little bit short of that. And then it's like, well, how did you get to the mid 80s? Because if you'd have said before 2023, like, hey, the Cardinals are going to win 71 games this year, first of all, you'd have to pick yourself up off the floor. And then you would go, well, surely everybody got fired, right? But why is it that with the way the season actually played out, none of us were shocked not to see that level of movement? At least I wasn't. I didn't expect Ollie to get fired. There were days during the season where I did, and I wrote the article just in case, like because it got bleak at a certain point. But once it's all kind of behind you and in the rear view, we're going, yeah, the Cardinals don't do stuff like that. They just hired this guy to that role a couple years ago, and so they're going to let him have some room. it's really interesting to think about in that way. But if you're right in the middle, where Cardinals fans they've said for years, oh, the Cardinals are just always stuck in the middle. Well, usually they're in the playoffs, which is a little bit above the middle. But if they were truly going to be that middle team to win 80, 82 games a year, that would be tricky because the front office would have to make some uncomfortable decisions, and so would ownership. I don't know what it would be, but I would lean toward, like, if they miss the playoffs, I would lean toward there would be some change, especially if the fan angst got to the point that I think it would be if they miss again, because they wouldn't be able to ignore it anymore. Ticket sales were bad toward the end of last year. What's going to be interesting this year is the ticket sales thing, because a lot of those tickets were sold assuming the team would be good. Now, at the end of the year, nobody was in the seats, but the tickets were technically still sold. When that's not the case this year, how does that have an impact? I think that is the thing that DeWitt will take notice of if they win 80 games.
Yeah, and then the Ollie discussion. So Mozeliak, in my opinion, there's no way that Bill DeWitt Jr. ever fires John Mozeliak.
I
Whatever
agree.
happens, and I like John Mozeliak. So I hope 2 years from now he just goes up into that whatever the Kenny Williams role, right? You just whatever that role is, and somebody else can be the chief baseball officer decision maker. But Bill DeWitt Jr. will never fire John Mozeliak, in my opinion. Ollie's an interesting question.